So hi and welcome to this NPTEL course titled Trauma and Literature. In this session we will conclude reading the novel Nervous Conditions. This will be a final session on this novel, after which we'll move on to a new text. So since it's a concluding session, we'll just look at certain selected sections in this essay, which is a pretty comprehensive coverage of the entire novel, Dangarembga's Nervous Conditions, and this is page 66 in this particular essay. Now, if you remember in the session last time, we were talking about how the enduring tensions between the colonial and the post-colonial moment continues to function, and that just keeps putting certain people in positions of privilege and certain people in positions of marginality or marginalization or powerlessness. It just continues to operate that way. But what the novel also does, it offers a very complex gray area, a very complex gray depiction that sort of cuts against any kind of attempt at monstrosity. You know, it's not as if some people are just bad and some people are just good, and it's a battle between good and evil. It's not so simple or dualistic like that. So it resists that kind of a reductionism, and in doing so, it just becomes a very, very fine novel about colonial times in Zimbabwe. Right, so this question of Englishness comes up again, and this is page 66, and this should be on the screen. The reader may remember Marshingai's cautioning against extremes, that one cannot afford to internalize too much Englishness, which she divines as a cause of Nyasha and Shido's mental and cultural crisis, and indirectly of Namo's untimely death. So, you know, the consumption of Englishness becomes interesting and becomes a cause of conflict, a cause of tension, a cause of crisis in this novel. Because Englishness is seen as the other culture, and consuming the other culture is also connected to a possibility of contamination. We can see how these concepts, contamination, illness, etc., they straddle or connect the medical and the political realms quite complexly. Her insistence that Tambu be careful with assimilation does not imply a call for complete and uncompromising renunciation of Western cultural values when and where they could be useful to one's specific needs, but an imperative destabilization and rejection of their predominance, as well as a judicious fusion of those acquired values and one's ancestral and cultural heritage. So the ideal point, of course, is the integration of the acquired values, the positive acquired values, and one's positive inheritance of lineage, one's positive cultural heritage. But of course, I mean, that kind of an integration is, you know, more often than not theoretical in quality. But what happens in lived experience is a very asymmetric entanglement. You consume something more, you reject something more, and in that process, you just end up being, end up consuming a flawed ideology, which is a, strange combination of different kinds of cultural inputs, which is what happens in this novel as well. It's impossible to define and have a symmetrical understanding of Western and Eastern, Western or non-Western attributes. They just mix in a way that is asymmetric, mix in a way which is undefinable, indefinable. In the process, it just becomes, a problem, a problematic, right, in terms of ideology. And this is something which we find even in small instruments, small machines, small objects. So objects play a very important role in this novel, as do spaces. So, a large part of this essay, for instance, talks about the discursive design of spaces, the gendered quality of spaces. But we find something similar happening with objects as well. And the object in question in this particular essay is the Dover stove, the electric machine that will produce and facilitate cooking in the process, bring about a change in the kitchen, bring about a change in the woman space in the house, the quote-unquote female space in the house. And that's something which is examined here. So the house comes with a symbol of Western civilization, technology and material progress, a Dover stove. But while Marshingay is very proud of her house and Dover stove, she preferred an old hut, a choto. She said she felt more comfortable beside it. So Marshingay refuses wisely to appropriate from the gift package an alien material, an ideological construct that, on the one hand, she is not yet conditioned by experience to use both safely and efficiently, and on the other hand, could upset her comfort/balance as in Baba Mukuru's connotative lack of sleep, or Nyasha's bicultural impassive, right? So we find how the very symbolic material, and we talked about a symbolic space, the hairdresser space in the previous session, but here we find a very symbolic domestic material, domestic machine, the Dover stove, how that becomes a complicated instrument in the house. So, it just remains an alien instrument, and, Martian guy doesn't appropriate it, and the refusal to appropriate this Western machine is seen as wise, and is seen as judicious in the context of a novel, because she holds on to her traditional instruments of cooking, the culinary instruments. And we find that how this uncritical consumption of Western technology, Western ideology, Western belief systems causes some kind of bodily problem, nervous, medical problems. So Baba Mukuru's discomfort while sleeping, or Nyasha's impasse and then subsequent deterioration in health, is seen as connected to consuming alien cultures and alien belief systems, which complicate them at a bodily level as well as at an ideological level. So again, we are looking at how ideology and biology become connected conditions in this novel, right? And this is something which you find in many post-colonial novels, where medicine, politics, health, hygiene, body, corporeality, these become very enmeshed together. And that's the whole purpose of a course like this, Trauma and Literature, to look at trauma as, may I mention the very introduction to this lecture, as an embedded neurobiological condition, but also a political and active shared social condition. And that's something which you find, that interplay of the social and the biological happening almost simultaneously. Right. Nyasha's mental crisis further exemplifies the narrative's thematic insistence on balance, right? So the lack of balance is what causes nervous conditions. And balance, of course, is cultural, ideological, discursive, and quality. Nyasha suffers a nervous breakdown because, among other things, she loses a psychic balance when she, for instance, Tambu, goes to Sacred Heart, that in a missionary school. Tambu, who sees a fondness for her cousin as her first love affair, had been Nyasha's buffer, distraction, room, space, mate, confidant, and character foil, the person with whom she juggled and balanced her radical idealism and teenage grievances. Nyasha admits to Tambu in a letter, "In many ways, you are very essential to me, bridging some of the gaps in my life, and now that you're away, I feel them again." So again, look at the spatial metaphors. Tambu was, the bridge through which Nyasha connected different positions, and those gaps have come back again now that Tambu is away. So we can see how the human body, the human self, the human identity is also a spatial identity in the novel, in very symbolic as well as experiential ways. So Tambu herself confesses that Nyasha is something unique and necessary for me, reminiscent of the interdependent characters Sula and Nell in Toni Morrison's Sula. Nyasha and Tambu may differ in idea and personality, but the need and mutually reinforce each other in various ways, as the narrative details. Now, this idea of contradictory characters, or different characters coming together and creating ambivalence and experiencing ambivalence, is again a hallmark of any great work of fiction, any great work of literature, right? So this is something which you find over and over again, in this particular novel. Okay, so I will skip a little bit, and that is we will come to Tambu's keynote. This is page 68, and that keynote has some kind of a shuddering quality, shocking quality. It is meant to shock, it's designed to shock, and that the shock aesthetic in that keynote obviously is reflective of the mental condition, the nervous condition, but also the political condition from which the subject is speaking or writing. So this is page 68, which should be on your screen. So Tambu's shocking keynote, her suspenseful opening assertion in which she, 1, refuses to feel sorry for her brother Namo's death, 2, understates the efficacy of Nyasha's defiance, and 3, introduces the major players in the unfolding tale, does more than serve as a stylistic device that slides into the narrative space an oral element. Now, this is the interesting bit, and this is why I just chose this section. Now, on the one hand, there is this narrative design in the novel. I mean, it's a work of narrative, it's a piece of writing, etc. But what it also does, this particular keynote, is it infuses into the narrative design, this written narrative design, an oral voice, an oral element, someone speaking. And that oral quality is interesting because we have to remember that these are cultures like every other culture in the world which rely on oral narratives in terms of an intergenerational play of meaning and values and philosophy, etc. Now, what's interesting is how the traditional oral narrative, where which produces and preserves value, is used as a medium to shock over here. So the oral narrative over here is not meant to consolidate or to comfort or to give some kind of an intergenerational idea on philosophy of this culture. Rather, the oral narrative over here, the oral voice, the oral quality over here is meant to shock. So the medium is conservative, but the content is radical. And that's what makes this novel so interesting and complex in quality, right? So this is the shocking quality of the keynote, right? It also extends the text's suggestion that of cautioned balance as a pragmatic survival strategy for the ex-colonial. So together with Dangarembga's subsequent injection of Shona language, terms and tonality, this keynote initiates authorial placement in the story in what I have called complementary duality of narrative mode. Now, this is an interesting term used by, in this particular essay, the complementary duality. So on the one hand, it's dual in quality. There's this narrative design and there's this oral voice, but then they complement to one another. So hence the term complementary duality. So it's dual, but at the same time it's complementary. They come together as one instrument of storytelling. By having Tambu pose that rhetorical statement immediately, Dangarembga does something striking, stylistically and thematically. She makes a narrative a collaboration of dialogue, of modes, orality, the novel, the tool, the written, the resiliently African, the imported Western. Now, we find there are these binaries and dualisms running across the way here, but what this particular keynote does in a very defiant way, in a very subversive way, is it brings these dualisms together on the table, and then as a reader we find these are complementary dualisms, complementary dualities. So the narrative is designed in such a way to bring the dualisms together and also make them complementary in terms of being connected categories rather than being ontological opposites of each other. And therein lies the genius, the brilliance of this novel, or shall we say the medium of fiction, the uniqueness of the medium of fiction is exactly this. It can bring all the dualisms together, it can bring these ontological opposites together, and yet create this complementarity through which we can find, we read this, or we comprehend this as connected categories, right? So the connectivity is a key over here, and that's something which we find very, very useful. Okay, so all these dualisms come together. Orality, the novel, the told, the written, the resiliently African, the imported Western. So the stereotypical differences and dualisms are brought together and produced together as one ambivalent condition, one connected condition, one complementary condition. Illustrating Mildred Mortimer's insight as to how in Africa and African literature in general, orality and literacy often inhabit the same space, Dangarembga makes both modes function cooperatively under the same narrative roof, right? So this is a very elegant metaphor. The narrative roof is the same narrative umbrella, the same roof, the same shelter, the same space. And that's what I meant in the previous session when I talked about spaces. Because even in a very metafictional way, the novel is a space where these different voices can be combined and seen as complementary to one another rather than being distant. Right, so along with the space of the house, along with the space of the school, along with the space of the market, along with the space of the hairdresser, the novel nervous condition also becomes a space where these complementary dualisms can come together and emerge together and function together. Right, so there's also this metafictional quality about spatiality in this novel. Okay, right, so and then we can see, I'm just skipping a few paragraphs and this should be on the screen. Tambu identifies herself as a storyteller. Consistent with oral storytelling, therefore, Dangarembga technically presumes an immediate listenership, that's a lovely word, listenership, or what she calls an amorphous audience, right? The fluid amorphous audience, which can absorb many voices, many forms of storytelling, many forms of narrative designs. Now, most of all, by startling the audience immediately and also leaving holes in the story through suspense, she invites the audience's participation and deferred response to a storyteller's prefatory and performative comment/call, in which is also revealed the occasion for the story. Now, what this does over here is that the amorphous, fluid quality of the audience, the the presupposed audience is a very mixed audience, a very fluid audience. But then that audience is startled, this audience is informed, this audience is told the story through different, deliberately left suspenses, deliberately left gaps. Now those gaps invite the audience to co-create the story, to be co-writers of the story. So in that sense, this novel becomes a very open-ended novel. It becomes a very complex, fluid novel, which invites interpretations of all kinds, right, rather than being a closed story, right? So the whole idea of prefacing the story and performing the story begin to become combined, begin to sort of connect to each other. So there's a prefatory quality to the story, and there's a performative quality to the story, and the performative quality leaves open-endedness, leaves open-ended occasions in the story, which in a way arouses the empathy of the reader, because we can imagine what is going on. You can imagine through the suspensions what may or may not have happened, and this invitation to imagine is what makes the novel so profound in quality at a level of empathy. So Dangarembga would like us as Tambu's audience and chorus, the you to whom she addresses the story, to suspend judgment until we have been fully inside the narrative space and have heard/read or can now juggle and balance the whole text/tale, even as complex and delicate as is its content, right? So you find there's this quality, this choric quality about us. When we are reading the novel, because the novel is addressed to the reader, so the reader directly addresses you. But it's also an invitation. It's not just a passive consumption. We're also invited to participate in the story. And then we can only participate fully if we suspend our judgment and we just get involved and absorbed in the narrative space. And we can see how these dualisms, hearing and reading, happening simultaneously. There are voices in the novel which we are supposed to hear. And there are, of course, sections which are supposed to read, but there is also a human voice trying to tell us a story. And that idea of the text and the tale, the written text and the spoken tale, they all combine together in a novel, and which makes a novel complex and delicate. The form becomes as complex and delicate as the content in the story, right? So that there's the classic quality of form and content combining together. That's something which we see over and over again. Right, and this is page 69, the second paragraph, which should be on the screen. Dangarembga has masterly embedded that issue of openness to the novel's plot, collaborating plot/movement/journey and space, and addressing this rather important question: how long will decolonization, the female characters' battles against spatial limitations, and this balancing act last? Speaking broadly, how long will the ex-colonials' response to the crisis go on? The novel's plot offers some answers, right? So this is the basic story about the questions of the colonial condition, and how long will the marginalized continue to stay the marginalized? How long will female subjects be limited to certain spaces? How long will spatiality inform identity? So these are the fundamental questions, the big questions that the novel asks. But the novel's plot offers some answers, but obviously it's not a closed novel, so it just leaves it open-ended in the end for us to imagine and reinterpret over and over again. Right, so we will sort of wind up now, and the last bit is interesting, because that's what the essay will connect the novel to some of the other writers writing in that tradition. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, for example, is another case in point. But this novel emerges as the very complex novel about medical female spatial conditions, which are as much a part of the local tradition as much a part of the post-colonial tradition. So the post-colonial and the local merge together and create this asymmetric production and condition of power. Right, so, and this is the final page 72, which should be on the screen. While nervous conditions offer such families no simplistic solution. So these are families where people suffer, people are imprisoned, people are confined to certain spatial conditions. It offers such families no simplistic solutions to rather difficult and at times painful problems. it nonetheless has faith that this post-colonial experience is indeed survivable, and indigenous sexism, no matter how rooted, cannot go unconfronted and unbent. So there is this element of hope and redemption that the novel also has. So in this deep-seated sexism, this post-colonial problem can be transcended, can be moved away from if we just keep questioning it, if we keep rebelling, if we keep engaging with it in very complex, ambivalent ways. It must be stressed also that regardless of how much the text associates them with it, the woman's position is not the kitchen. In addition to its revolutionary trajectory, its change imperative, the novel advises perseverance, gentility, understanding, patience, and inclusion in response to Africa's familial matters. It also presents the character's fortune, especially Nyasha's and Bamba Mukura's own tragedy, as sites of instruction. So there's this instructive quality about the novel as well. I mean, the tragedy is also instructive. The tragedy in this fictional form also instructs us and the people closer to this culture in terms of how to negotiate, how to engage with these conditions, and perhaps offer or move towards some kind of a solution or liberation through a constant process of engagement. If Okonkwo's tragedy in Achebe's Things Fall Apart results mostly from his intent to remain unbending when the times call for ideological and attitudinal adjustment, the consequences of Baba Mukura's rigidity and exclusionism at a comparable historical moment becomes cautionary. We are not to emulate his troublous inflexibility and spatial domination. Right, so we find how this unchanging men in both novels, they become the sites of tragedy, and through which other people also suffer. So I'm guessing most of you read Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, and we find even that Okonkwo is this conservative character who is not willing to change, is not willing to sort of reshape himself, and therein lies a tragedy when things are falling apart, right, from his perspective. And we find something similar in Baba Mukuru in Nervous Conditions. This rigidity and exclusionism is also there, and that becomes a site of tragedy. Maybe the larger point is that there is really more than enough space here on this earth for all of us, for all our voices, including those of women who simply want to be able to live their lives unfettered in both the private and public domains. Should Nervous Conditions become a classic, as some are predicting, and the reason why I chose this essay is because it's written at a time when the novel did not become a classic. It was just written, it's in the 80s, and the essay is also around that time. So, and it's amusing how this essay is predicting this novel will become a classic as it is today. Should Nervous Conditions become a classic, as some are predicting, it may be because of how, among other things, Tsotsi Dangarembga succeeds remarkably in making the serious message that a narrative instruments can convey at work, not separately, but productively together. So the message in the novel is not of exclusionism, it's not about separatism, it's not about majoritarianism, it's not about some kind of identity formation or privileging of certain kinds of identity. Rather, the message, the moral message in the story is about inclusion, is about inclusivity, is about plasticity, is about coming together, accommodating different kinds of voices. And that accommodation and articulation of different kinds of voices is played out in the novel even at a formal level. So if you remember just a session we were discussing earlier, where the oral tradition of storytelling and the written tradition of storytelling are both included massively in the novel, right? And that kind of integration, that quality of integrating different kinds of voices, that polyphony of voices, the heteroglossia of voices is indeed what makes this novel so radical in quality, at the same time very, very human in quality. So the radicalism in the novel, it doesn't come at the cost of the humanity of the novel. Rather, the radicalism informs the humanity and vice versa. So yes, this is a novel about traumatic condition. This is a novel about nervous conditions. This is a novel about profound medical conditions, serious medical conditions of damage, of devastation, of despair. But at the same time, it is also a novel about hope and redemption and possibilities of change, which is what great books of fiction end up doing more often than not. With all the tragedy, with all the despair, with all the existential and real tragedy and grief, there's also this kernel of hope that is there in the novel through which change may appear, change may emerge in the times to come. So with that, we conclude Nervous Conditions by Tsotsi Dangarembga. It's a marvelous novel, and And this essay is also quite comprehensive. And like I said, the reason why I chose this essay is because it was written around the same time, and the novel was written roughly the same time. So it is very immediate in quality, the essay, and it's very, very sort of spontaneous in the way it reads the novel. So it's not really a studied essay which is done from the present, looking back at that time of publication. It's done in a very immediate, ad hoc, spontaneous way, and that's what makes the essay so beautiful and comprehensive in quality. So with that, we end the nervous conditions novel and move on to the next text in the subsequent sessions. Thank you for your attention.